Russia's Wagner mercenary group will exit eastern Ukraine's Bakhmut next week after suffering losses due to critical ammunition shortages, the private military contractor's founder Yevgeny Prigozhin announced Friday. Wagner fighters, many of whom are convicts recruited from Russian prisons, have been at the forefront of Russia's efforts to capture Bakhmut, taking heavy losses in a brutal, months-long battle. Tensions between Wagner and Russia's defense ministry have simmered during this time, with Prigozhin accusing the Russian army of taking credit for victories won by Wagner fighters and of slowing down Wagner units' advances in Ukraine. "My soldiers will not suffer senseless and unjustified losses in Bakhmut without ammunition," Prigozhin said in a video address published by his press service in which he is flanked by masked Wagner soldiers. "That's why we will exit Bakhmut on May 10, 2023, he said, adding that Wagner fighters will decamp until the Russian people need us again. The announcement came hours after he filmed an expletive-laden tirade against the military's top brass over the alleged ammunition shortage in Bakhmut. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, Russian Chief of the General Staff of the Armed Forces Valery Gerasimov, where the FCK is the ammunition. The fuming Prigozhin said on camera. He filmed the address in the dark of night in front of about 30 dead men, some covered in blood, who he said were Wagner soldiers who would be alive if the ammunition shortage had been resolved. "You sit there, bastards, in expensive clubs," Prigozhin said. "You think you're the masters of this life and that you have the right to dispose of their lives. They came here as volunteers and are dying for you to live it up in your Redwood offices. Keep that in mind." There is a rift between Prigozhin and top Russian military commanders who expressed doubts about the mercenary force with President Vladimir Putin, Bloomberg reported earlier this year. Wagner has taken a leading role in the fighting for the eastern Ukrainian city of Bakhmut since the summer of 2022, which has still not been fully seized by Russia despite the loss of thousands of lives on both sides. After a spring offensive that largely failed to make any significant territorial gains, military analysts believe that Russian forces in Ukraine are shifting to the defense ahead of a major Ukrainian attack. Russia carried out another hybrid attack on a number of Ukrainian oblasts on the 435th day of the war. Meanwhile, Russian forces also attempted to advance towards Bodanivka and Markov on the Bakhmut front and to improve their tactical positions on the Marinka front. Source: General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine on Facebook. Information is of 1800 on the 5th of May. Quote from the General Staff: "Last night, the Russian Federation deployed Iranian-made Shahed-136 131st attack drones to carry out another large-scale attack across the territory of Ukraine. Our defense forces destroyed 18 out of 24 drones. Today the enemy also carried out 6 missile strikes on the cities of Kramatorsk and Zaporizhia, 66 airstrikes, and deployed multiple launch rocket systems (MLRS) to conduct 33 further attacks on the positions of Ukrainian forces and on civilian settlements. Sadly, there are civilian casualties, and a number of private residential houses, educational establishments, and other civilian infrastructure facilities sustained damage." Details. Meanwhile, Ukrainian aircraft carried out 6 airstrikes on areas where Russian military personnel were concentrated. 4 Russian Lancet loitering munitions were also destroyed over the course of the day. Units of Ukraine's rocket forces and artillery struck 5 areas where Russian military personnel were concentrated, 2 ammunition storage points, and 1 electronic warfare system. The Russian army continues to focus its main efforts on conducting offensive operations on the Lyman, Bakhmut and Marinka fronts, where Ukrainian forces repelled around 50 Russian assaults. Fighting is particularly fierce in the cities of Bakhmut and Marinka. There is no evidence that Russia is forming offensive units on the Volyn and Polishcha fronts. On the Severshina and Slobozhanshina fronts, Russian forces deployed mortars and artillery to fire on Yelin, Mykolaievka, Ivanivka, Buchki and Remyok Chernihiv Oblast, Uralo, Porokhin, Studenok, Shalahin, Rivne, Boyaro-Lezachi, Stukalivka, Bilopilya, Oleksivka, Unikivka and Slavhorod, Sumy Oblast, and Libok, Vesel, Vovchansky Kudary, Karaikny, Bochkov and Budarki Kharkiv Oblast. Several private houses have been damaged or destroyed. There are civilian casualties. The Russians did not undertake offensive operations on the Kupiansk front. They deployed mortars and artillery to fire on Kamyanka, Vorokna, Zapatna, Lyman-Pershi, Kyslivka, Krokmel and Berestov Kharkiv Oblast. Russian forces conducted unsuccessful offensive operations on the Lyman front, in the southwestern suburbs of Spern. Makivka, Andriivka, Rakivka, Dubrova and Bilohorivka, Luhansk Oblast, and Torsky, Verkhnekamiansk and Spern, Donetsk Oblast came under Russian fire. Fighting continues in the city of Bakhmut on the Bakhmut front. Over the course of today, the Russians made unsuccessful attempts to advance on Bodanivka and Markov. Nikaiforivka, Vashukivka, Novomarkov, Markov, Hurahorivka, Bodanivka, Bakhmut, Ivanovsky, Chasiv Yar, Delivka, Zalians and New York Donetsk Oblast came under Russian fire. Russian forces did not undertake offensive operations on the Avdiivka front but shelled Avdiivka, Pervomaysk, Karlivka and Netailov Donetsk Oblast. Russian forces are attempting to improve their tactical positions on the Marinka front. Ukraine's defense forces repelled numerous Russian assaults near Marinka. Krasnohorivka, Pobeda and Novomikhailivka Donetsk Oblast came under Russian fire. On the Shakhtarsk front, the Russians shelled Novokranka, Prekostivka and Shakhtarsk Donetsk Oblast. Russian forces are still on the defensive on the Zaporizhia and Kherson fronts. They shelled more than 50 settlements, including Vremivka, Novosilka and Novopil Donetsk Oblast, Huliaipol, Molotokmichka, Novodanilivka and Orikhiv Zaporizhia Oblast, Nikopol Dnepropetrovsk Oblast, in Dudchiny, Zimivka, Ivanivka, Dniprovsky, Kizimys and the city of Kherson, Kherson Oblast. Quote from the General Staff: Russian occupation forces are continuing to suffer significant losses on the battlefield. All medical centers in the temporarily occupied territories are overflowing with injured occupiers, forcing the enemy to set up additional medical centers on the premises of civilian educational establishments. For example, a local school's gym has been converted into a military hospital. Meanwhile, Russian occupiers are forcing teachers to continue teaching, and school attendance remains compulsory for local children.